I'm sort of intrigued by the fact that he's teaming up with historians of magic and religious studies to study the material effects and concrete results of magic. Now, in an upcoming experiment with European scholars, he's going to do just this. And this is explained in an intro video that you have today. These experiments are sort of summarized by Bernd Christianado. So this is sigil magic. Now, what is sigil? A sigil is, like in the center, a symbolic representation of an idea or a desire that by focusing on it can charge that thing and cause the mental energy focused through that sigil to make changes on the world. Watch the video by Bernd Christianado to get the full details on this. He explains it better than I can. However, I know a lot of people that practice sigil magic. It really only got started in the 1970s with a thing called chaos magic, which we're going to come back to toward the end of the class. Okay, supposing that reality can be influenced by the mind, or that reality is just mind or idealism, then the mind should be able to affect physical matter. Now, in quantum physics, they talk about the observation problem. And that is if you shoot a bunch of photons at this special thing with two slits in it, that which goes through when you record it with instruments will look like waves. However, if you are watching it or watching the results, they'll come out as particles. This is the particle wave problem. Again, see the video on this. So what they're trying to do is see if there's an influence on sigil magic to collapse the wave or particle problem. So physics people explain this more. There's a lot going on here. So observing a process of photons slipping through these little slots will dictate whether it is a wave or a particle. This is the classic observer influence thesis. Now, what's going to happen in the near future, and I'm excited about these results, is small devices will be distributed to various magic operators, and they'll have them focus their attention and see if they get slits or if they get waves or particles. Then they're going to do that focusing on sigil magic, focusing on just pure paying attention, or no focus and just looking at the thing. And they're going to see if there's a statistical difference in the reported data. Now, what does this really prove? It's hard to say. I have trouble thinking through a lot of these experiments. But what's interesting is that these are ways to scientifically and materialistically measure whether some of these magic rituals are effective. So Dean Radin designs and reports upon experiments that aim to detect psychic powers. But the key to the data and the experiments is statistics. He's able to demonstrate that the results show statistically significant evidence that psychic phenomena actually occur, are not just hokum. For instance, if he was to have 100 people perform a remote viewing activity, trying to see something at a distance through their mind, only a small amount of people will be successful at it. But, and he's shown this in a couple of cases, he demonstrates that it is more than 50%. They're either effective or not. There's a statistical model that shows that it is more effective when these work than just what it would be if it was completely random and there was no influence. He's not making huge claims or denominations. He's just looking for 51%, 51 and 49. So you can read through a number of these studies in the reading for today. There's a lot of them. And when you read, I want you to just focus on stuff that seems really interesting to you. If you want to read the whole thing, feel free. It's actually pretty well written, but I get a little slogged down with all the details. So I would suggest skimming until you find some rituals or some experiments that you seem really interested in. So he also, what I want you to do is think about that is, what is the most effective way to think about these experiments? How are they set up? What do they measure? Do the results prove the hypothesis that the mind is more powerful than expected? That the mind may be non-local, that the mind might not just be in here? I think what's really particularly interesting to me is that he also shows that these psychic effects are far more effective than when people believe in them. He talks about sheep and goat. Goats are people who are just not going to believe no matter what. And sheep are going to believe that psychic powers are possible. Generally, when goat people look at stuff, It doesn't work. They're not convinced, and the experiments don't work. But sheep people that already believe in the effectiveness of these psychic powers, they have a statistically higher and therefore relevant instance of these psychic powers being effective. This is why it's so hard to reproduce these experiments. He also notes that the experiments are not psychics in the wild, but they are done in an experimental and controlled setting, just where these events are less likely to happen. They're more likely to happen when you're not in a lab. Perhaps the lab prevents these effects from being effective. Okay, so Radin wants to prove that this mental force is real and observable using science and the scientific method. However, I would argue, and these are just kind of questions. Do we actually miss the religious aspects of magic when we try to make it into science? When we try to have a material evaluation of, say, prayer or visualization or something? Maybe we miss how these activities are more than just effective or not, but have a cultural, mental, and psychological positive effect on the people who use them. I want you to think, can the lens of science capture the human experience ever? I mean, really? Can we say that material sciences really figure out how our brain works? Do brain science findings actually tell us about the mind and the fullness of the mind? Think about what is to be gained or lost by this scientific perspective. Now, science is usually explicitly materialist in nature. It really only looks to material causes. But Radin uses science to critique materialist reductionism by saying, I can look at material things specifically and show non-material effects on them. I mean, furthermore, Radin posits non-duality, that man, God, the universe are not two, they are one. That the notion that we are separate beings from the divine, from the world, and from each other is an illusion. That the expansive mind is far more vast than what the bag of meat in the head. So what? How does science and magic connect? Think about that. Maybe magic doesn't have a place in science, or science doesn't have a place in magic. Science these days is becoming stranger and stranger as we look at physics. So perhaps our world is getting stranger and stranger. Maybe these strange things in psychic and physics world actually prove that psychic effects can occur. There is the possibility that influences are non-material. Kick that around. I mean, honestly, I think what it really calls us to do is to be open to the occult secrets, occult being hidden. The things about yoga powers and all of the yoga texts, the ability for a yogi to make different copies of himself or to see at a long distance without using his eyes. Maybe there's a possibility to something there. And after all, magic narratives, in fact, all these narratives about magic and all our stories about superpowers, maybe they're telling us a truth that we just can't quite get. The other kind of funny thing that I want to end with is the modern scientist is thought to be purely material and not interested in occult things or magic or anything like that. But if you look into the past, Louis Pasteur, Isaac Newton, these guys were doing these profound material experiments. But then in their spare time, they were also fooling around with alchemy and psychic influence and talking to ghosts. So when we split these sort of magical ways of being from materialistic and scientific ways of being, we have to remember that that's relatively new. That's a new thing that we just started doing. As humans, science and magic generally went together. And the majority of our great scientists were also quite often interested in magic. Just like, let's say the classic argument is that you cannot believe in Christianity and the miracles of Christ and be a scientist. Well, I can line up Christian scientists, not Christian scientists, but scientists who are Christians and believe in the reality of Christ. Hey, line them up all day long. We can talk to them. Hindus, in fact, see no conflict between the magic of Hinduism and science. And the more they learn about science, the more they're like, yeah, this proves Hinduism. So maybe science and religion aren't too separate after all. Okay, I'll catch you on the flip side. Take care. Bye-bye.